What if everything you learned in school about human history was only half the story? What if the timeline you were handed, the one that starts with cave drawings and ends with smartphones, skipped entire chapters of civilizations so advanced that even today, with all of our satellites, artificial intelligence, and nanotechnology, we still cannot explain what they built, how they built it, or why every single one of them vanished without leaving a single survivor to tell the tale? Because right now, buried beneath deserts, submerged under oceans, and locked inside stones that no modern machine has been able to replicate, there is evidence of not one, but 10 ancient civilizations that were operating at levels of sophistication that should have been impossible for their time. And the most chilling part is not just what they knew, it is that they are all gone, completely, as if something or someone pressed a reset button on human civilization more than once throughout history.
We tend to think of progress as a straight line moving forward, a ladder we've been climbing rung by rung since the first humans figured out how to start a fire. But archaeology keeps finding things that break that assumption wide open. The Antikythera mechanism, pulled from a shipwreck off the coast of Greece in 1901, is a device that looks like it belongs in the workshop of a modern engineer. Dating back to around 150 to 100 BCE, it contains at least 37 interlocking bronze gears and was designed to calculate the movements of the sun and moon, predict solar and lunar eclipses, and track the cycles of the Olympic Games with astonishing precision. Nothing remotely similar appeared again in human history for over 1,200 years. That is not an evolution. That is a gap. That is evidence of something rising, reaching an extraordinary peak, and then disappearing entirely. The ancient Greeks were just one piece of this puzzle. Beneath the sands of modern-day Pakistan and India, the ruins of a civilization called the Indus Valley, also known as the Harappan civilization, have been pulling the rug out from under conventional history for decades. At its height, around 2500 BCE, the Indus Valley civilization stretched across an area larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. Their cities, including Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, had grid-planned streets so precise they looked like they were designed on a computer. They had standardized weights and measurements, advanced metallurgy, and a sewage and drainage system so sophisticated that many modern cities in developing countries still do not match it. Every house had access to running water and connected drains. In 2500 BCE. Let that settle for a moment. What makes the Indus Valley civilization even more haunting is what we don't know about it. Their writing system, known as the Indus script, has never been decoded. Not a single expert on Earth has been able to crack it, which means every law, every story, every instruction manual, every piece of knowledge they ever recorded is locked away in symbols we cannot read. Then, around 1900 BCE, the entire civilization collapses. No dramatic battle, no clear evidence of an invasion powerful enough to wipe out such a widespread society, no volcanic eruption, no single catastrophic event. The cities are simply abandoned. The people disperse. The knowledge evaporates. One of the most organized, urban, hydraulically advanced civilizations the ancient world had ever seen just stops existing. And we still do not know exactly why. Far from the dust of the Indian subcontinent, on the island of Crete in the Aegean Sea, another extraordinary civilization was building something equally impossible to fully explain. The Minoans thrived from roughly 2700 to 1450 BCE and built palace complexes like Knossos that covered over 20,000 square meters, featuring indoor plumbing, flushing toilets, elaborate painted frescoes in vivid colors that still look breathtaking today, and a trade network that stretched across the entire Mediterranean. Their artwork reflects a society that valued beauty, athleticism, women in positions of authority, and a sophisticated religious life. Their written language, called Linear A, has also never been deciphered, which means, just like the Harappans, everything the Minoans ever wrote down remains unreadable to us. Around 1450 BCE, the Minoan civilization collapses, the Palace of Knossos is destroyed, and the most advanced maritime civilization in the ancient Mediterranean world simply ceases to exist.
Thousands of miles away, on the arid plains of southern Peru, a civilization called the Nazca was doing something that makes no logical sense unless you accept that they had access to technology or knowledge that we still cannot fully account for. Between 500 BCE and 500 CE, the Nazca people carved enormous geoglyphs into the desert surface, depictions of animals, plants, insects, and perfect geometric shapes spanning hundreds of meters across. There are over 800 straight lines, some stretching for 50 kilometers without a single deviation. There are spirals, trapezoids, and figures like the famous hummingbird and spider that measure up to 93 meters in length. The lines are so large and so precisely proportioned that they can only be fully appreciated and understood from high above the ground. No mountain in the region is tall enough to have served as a vantage point. No hot air balloon technology existed, and yet someone planned and executed these designs with a level of spatial accuracy that still impresses modern surveyors. Then the Nazca collapsed, absorbed into the earth as mysteriously as their lines remain imprinted on it.
The mystery of the Nazca lines is not just about the size or the precision, it's about the intention. Why would a civilization dedicate enormous labor and resources to creating artwork that could only be properly seen from the sky? Some researchers have proposed that the lines served as astronomical markers. Others suggest they were sacred pathways used in ritual. And a minority have theorized something even more provocative about the intended audience. Whatever the answer is, the Nazca clearly possessed an understanding of large-scale geometry, land surveying, and long-term planning that rivals modern engineering projects. The fact that they built these things and then vanished as a distinct civilization makes the lines feel less like ruins and more like a message we still have not fully decoded.
On the other side of the Atlantic, in modern-day Lebanon, sits Baalbek, a site that has been quietly dismantling the confidence of engineers and archaeologists for over a century. The Romans built a massive temple complex here, which would already be impressive enough on its own. But beneath the Roman construction, there are megalithic stone blocks called the trilithon that measure roughly 19 meters long, 4 meters high, and weigh somewhere between 800 and 1,200 tons each. There is also a stone nearby called the Stone of the Pregnant Woman that weighs an estimated 1,000 tons, and another block discovered in 2014 that tips the scales at around 1,650 tons, making it the largest known worked stone block in the entire world. No modern crane currently in operation can lift a 1,650-ton stone. The technology needed to move these blocks, position them with the precision seen at Baalbek, and set them into place simply does not exist in any known ancient engineering toolbox. And the civilization responsible for placing those original megalithic stones is unknown.
Moving to the ancient highlands of Bolivia, there's a site called Tiwanaku, sitting at over 3,800 meters above sea level near Lake Titicaca. At that altitude, crops had difficult to grow, oxygen is thin, and surviving is itself an achievement. And yet, the people of Tiwanaku built a monumental city that endured for over 1,000 years, featuring massive stone temples, precisely carved monolithic gateways, and an agricultural system called raised field farming that increased crop yields so dramatically that modern agronomists have actually revived the technique in the region with great success. The Gateway of the Sun, a single stone monolith carved from a single block of andesite, is decorated with intricate iconography that scholars have spent decades trying to interpret. Around 1000 CE, Tiwanaku collapses, likely due to a prolonged drought, but the full extent of their knowledge in agriculture, hydraulics, and stonemasonry goes with them, and the region does not recover that level of prosperity for centuries.
The Göbekli Tepe site in modern-day Turkey has completely rewritten the story of human civilization since its excavation began in the 1990s. Dating back to at least 9500 BCE, over 11,000 years ago, it is the oldest known complex of monumental stone structures on Earth. The site features massive T-shaped pillars up to 5.5 meters tall and weighing up to 20 tons, covered in detailed carvings of animals, including foxes, scorpions, vultures, lions, and abstract symbols. The level of artistic and architectural sophistication on display here is so far beyond what was considered possible for that time period that it has led some researchers to completely reassess their understanding of early human cognitive and social development. What is even more disorienting is that Göbekli Tepe was deliberately buried, intentionally covered with tons of earth around 8000 BCE. Someone built it, used it, and then chose to bury it. The civilization or group responsible for its construction has no clear archaeological predecessor, as if they appeared fully formed, built something extraordinary, and then erased themselves from the record.
Egypt is often the first name that comes to mind when people think about ancient civilizations ahead of their time, and for good reason that goes far beyond the obvious grandeur of the pyramids. The Great Pyramid of Giza, built around 2560 BCE, is aligned with the cardinal directions to within 1/10 of a degree. It is positioned almost perfectly at the geographic center of all the Earth's landmass. The ratio of its perimeter to its height equals 2 times pi, an approximation of the mathematical constant that ancient Egyptians supposedly had no formal knowledge of. The internal chambers and shafts of the Great Pyramid point towards specific stars with a precision that even modern construction projects would struggle to match. Engineers who have studied it in detail routinely describe the craftsmanship inside as something they could not replicate today, even with advanced power tools. Whatever the Egyptian civilization knew, they knew it to a depth that remains genuinely staggering.
Yet, long before the dynastic Egyptians who built the pyramids, there may have been an even older civilizational layer in the same region. The Sphinx, sitting on the Giza Plateau, shows erosion patterns in its enclosure that geologists like Robert Schoch of Boston University have argued can only be explained by prolonged rainfall weathering, which would push the construction date of the Sphinx back to a period between 7000 and 10,000 BCE, when the Sahara experienced a much wetter climate. If Schoch and others are correct, the Sphinx is not a product of the civilization we call ancient Egypt, but of something older, something that preceded it, something we have not yet named or fully found. The idea that there may have been a highly organized and architecturally capable civilization in North Africa thousands of years before the earliest dynasties of Egypt is not fringe speculation anymore. It is a hypothesis being taken increasingly seriously by mainstream researchers.
The ancient Cambodian civilization that built the temple complex of Angkor Wat in the 12th century CE is often described in terms of its religious and artistic significance, but its engineering achievement is equally profound and equally confusing in its scope. Angkor Wat is the largest religious monument ever constructed on Earth, covering over 400 acres. But the full Angkor complex, when viewed using modern airborne laser scanning technology known as LiDAR, reveals an urban sprawl covering over 1,000 square kilometers, making it one of the largest pre-industrial cities ever discovered anywhere in the world. The hydraulic infrastructure of Angkor, its reservoirs, canals, and water management systems, was so extensive and so precisely engineered that it supported a population estimated at up to 1 million people at a time when London had only around 30,000 residents. The Khmer Empire that built Angkor collapsed in the 15th century, and the dense forest swallowed almost all of it so thoroughly that the full extent of what they built was only revealed to the modern world in 2015. One of the most quietly astonishing lost civilizations is that of the ancient Romans, specifically the Romans at the height of their concrete engineering. Roman concrete, known as opus cementitium, was mixed using volcanic ash, seawater, and lime, and it has been found to actually become stronger over time, as the seawater reacts with the volcanic material to form rare minerals inside the concrete structure. Modern concrete begins to degrade within 50 years. Roman concrete structures submerged in the Mediterranean Sea for 2,000 years are still intact, and in some cases still strengthening. Roman harbor structures, aqueducts, and buildings that have survived without maintenance for 2 millennia are testaments to a material science that our best engineers have only recently begun to reverse engineer. And after the collapse of the Roman Empire, this formula was lost for over 1,000 years, replaced by the inferior concrete we still predominantly use today, which cracks, erodes, and crumbles in ways that Roman concrete does not. Like a civilization of ancient Mali, specifically the builders behind the Great Mosque of Djenné and the legendary libraries of Timbuktu, represents a chapter of African intellectual history that the wider world still grossly underestimates. At its peak in the 14th and 15th centuries, the Mali Empire and its successor states supported a university city at Timbuktu that housed anywhere from 25,000 to 100,000 students, depending on the era, making it one of the largest centers of learning in the medieval world.
Over 700,000 manuscripts were produced and stored there, covering subjects including astronomy, mathematics, medicine, law, history, and philosophy. Many of these manuscripts described surgical techniques, herbal pharmacology, and astronomical observations that rivaled anything being produced in Europe at the time. When the Moroccan invasion of 1591 destroyed the Songhai Empire, much of this intellectual infrastructure collapsed. Libraries were looted, scholars were killed or enslaved, and centuries of accumulated knowledge were scattered, buried, or lost permanently. What once existed there was not primitive. It was a world-class civilization, and it was erased. The ancient Mesopotamian city of Babylon, under the reign of King Nebuchadnezzar II in the 6th century BCE, was possibly the most sophisticated urban environment on Earth at the time. The city featured massive gates made of glazed bricks decorated with glazed images of animals, complex palace complexes, a system of laws codified in the Code of Hammurabi that predates most other legal frameworks, and an astronomical tradition so precise that Babylonian astronomers were tracking planetary cycles, predicting lunar eclipses, and developing mathematical models of celestial motion that were not surpassed in Europe until the 17th century CE. Babylonian astronomers used a method of tracking the motion of Jupiter that is essentially a form of proto-calculus, a mathematical technique that was considered a European invention of the 17th century until clay tablets discovered in the mid-20th century revealed Babylonians had been using it 1,400 years earlier. Babylon fell to the Persians in 539 BCE, and while the city continued to exist under various rulers, its intellectual and scientific traditions slowly unwound, and the mathematical sophistication of its astronomer priests was not recovered for over a millennium.
The ancient Olmec civilization of Mexico, which flourished between roughly 1500 and 400 BCE, is often described as the mother culture of all subsequent Mesoamerican civilizations, including the Maya and the Aztec. The Olmecs built massive earthen mounds, created the first large-scale sculptural tradition in the Americas with their famous colossal stone heads, and appear to have developed the first writing system in the Western Hemisphere. They also appear to have developed a complex calendar system that influenced the later Maya long count calendar, the same calendar that the world incorrectly panicked about in 2012. The Olmec colossal heads, some weighing up to 40 tons, were carved from basalt boulders transported from quarries in the Tuxtla Mountains, over 80 kilometers away from where the heads were placed, without the use of the wheel, without metal tools, and without beasts of burden capable of carrying that weight. How they moved these stones has never been satisfactorily explained. And around 400 BCE, the Olmec heartland is abandoned. The sacred centers fall silent, and the civilization that gave birth to everything that came after in Mesoamerica simply fades from history.
It's impossible to talk about civilizations that seem to have known too much without discussing the ancient Egyptians' relationship with biology and medicine. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, dating to around 1600 BCE, but almost certainly copied from an even older source, is the world's oldest known surgical text. It describes 48 cases of trauma and injury with a systematic, rational cause and effect logic that was essentially the precursor to modern medical reasoning. It discusses examination, diagnosis, treatment, and prognosis in a methodical framework that would not appear again in Western medicine until the work of Hippocrates centuries later. The ancient Egyptians also performed successful brain surgeries, amputations, and dental procedures. They understood the relationship between the brain and bodily function at a time when most cultures attributed all thought and emotion to the heart. They used honey as an antibiotic, they practiced quarantine for infectious diseases, and they used moldy bread on wounds in a way that functionally mirrors the use of penicillin, thousands of years before Alexander Fleming famously discovered it in 1928.
Long before Europe had paved roads and covered sewage systems, the ancient Romans had both, along with underfloor heating systems called hypocastes that circulated hot air beneath the floors and through the walls of their public bathhouses and private homes. They had multi-story apartment buildings, public libraries, fast food restaurants with counter service, and a highway system of paved roads stretching over 80,000 kilometers that allowed goods, armies, and information to move across their empire with a speed and efficiency that would not be matched in Europe for well over 1,000 years after Rome's fall. The fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 CE did not just end a political entity, It ended a way of life that was in many measurable ways more hygienic, more connected, more organized, and more technologically sophisticated than anything that replaced it for nearly a millennium. The period that followed is called the Dark Ages for a reason. An entire operational civilization was lost, and it took Europe over 900 years to begin recovering what the Romans had already perfected. Like, the ancient Indian civilization, particularly during the Vedic and classical periods, produced scientific and mathematical knowledge that rewrote global intellectual history once Western scholars finally began paying close attention to it in the 18th and 19th centuries. The Indian mathematician Brahmagupta, writing in the 7th century CE, formalized the rules for arithmetic involving zero and negative numbers. The concept of zero as a number, not just a placeholder but an actual mathematical value, is an Indian invention that fundamentally enabled all subsequent mathematics, including algebra, calculus, computing, and modern physics. Indian astronomers calculated the length of the solar year with remarkable accuracy. The ancient texts of the Sushruta Samhita, dating to at least 600 BCE, describe surgical procedures including skin grafting and rhinoplasty that are essentially the same techniques modern plastic surgeons use today. Sushruta is widely acknowledged as the father of surgery. And the ancient metallurgists who forged the Iron Pillar of Delhi created an iron structure in roughly 402 CE that stands over 7 meters tall and has been standing in open air for over 1,600 years without any meaningful rusting or corrosion, a feat that modern metallurgists spent decades trying to understand before finally determining it involved a specialized phosphorus surface layer that current industrial processes still struggle to reliably replicate.
There is a pattern running through all 10 of these civilizations that is impossible to ignore once you have seen it. They rise, often quickly and seemingly from nowhere. They reach a level of sophistication that their surrounding world cannot match. They build things, record things, and understand things that take the rest of humanity centuries or millennia to rediscover. And then they disappear. Not just their political structures or their military power, but their actual knowledge, their techniques, their formulas, their manuscripts, their understanding of the world. It vanishes with them, as if knowledge itself can go extinct, as if wisdom is not automatically inherited, but must be actively maintained. And when the civilization that holds it collapses, everything it knew has to be painstakingly rebuilt from scratch by whoever comes next. Historians call this kind of knowledge collapse a dark age, and virtually every major civilization in recorded history has experienced at least one. The fall of the Bronze Age around 1200 BCE was perhaps the most catastrophic, when within a period of roughly 50 years, nearly every major civilization around the Eastern Mediterranean simultaneously collapsed. The Mycenaeans, the Hittites, the Ugaritic city-states, the Kassite Babylonians, and the Egyptian New Kingdom all experienced devastating disruption within the same narrow window of time. Literacy vanished in some regions for centuries. Long-distance trade collapsed, population levels plummeted, cities were abandoned. The cause remains debated to this day, with leading theories including drought, internal rebellions, earthquakes, and the enigmatic Sea Peoples, a mysterious group of migrants or invaders whose origin is still not definitively established. Whatever happened, it wiped out an entire interconnected network of advanced civilizations so thoroughly that the world that emerged on the other side had almost no memory of what came before. The question that haunts researchers who study these civilizations is not just how they reached such heights, but why their knowledge did not survive them. Part of the answer may lie in the fact that advanced knowledge in the ancient world was frequently concentrated in a small class of specialists, priests, engineers, astronomers, or scribes, who held their expertise close and passed it down through controlled lineages rather than distributing it broadly. When those lineages were broken by conquest, plague, famine, or social collapse, the knowledge died with the people who held it. The formula for Roman concrete was not written down in any surviving document clear enough for later generations to follow precisely. The method for creating Damascus steel, one of the most extraordinary blade forging techniques in history, producing blades with visible crystalline patterns and an edge that could cut through silk dropped on it from a height, disappeared sometime in the 18th century, despite Damascus steel being one of the most traded and coveted materials in the medieval world. The technique is gone.
Researchers have come close to understanding it, but no one has fully replicated the original.
Now, what makes all of this more than just an academic conversation is the implication it carries for our own moment in history. We live in a world of staggering complexity and breathtaking technological achievement. We carry more computing power in our pockets than existed in all of human history combined just 50 years ago. We have mapped the human genome, sent machines to other planets, and developed vaccines that have saved hundreds of millions of lives. It is easy in this environment to feel that we are the apex of human development, that all roads led here, and that from here there is only further upward progress. But the 10 civilizations in this story felt the same way about themselves. The Romans, at the height of their empire, had every reason to believe their civilization was permanent, unchallengeable, and ever-expanding. So did the Khmer. So did the people of Mohenjo-Daro. And they all ended. Not gradually, not gracefully, but with a collapse so complete that the survivors sometimes could not even remember clearly what had existed before. This is not a story designed to frighten you. It is a story designed to wake something up in you, the part that recognizes that human civilization is not a guaranteed project. It is a living, breathing, fragile achievement that requires constant tending. The 10 civilizations in this story were not failures. They were extraordinary. They were, in every meaningful sense of the word, greater than what surrounded them. Their disappearance was not inevitable from the beginning. It was the result of specific pressures, specific decisions, specific moments where the thread was cut and could not be retied. The Minoans left us their frescoes. The Nazca left us their lines. The Romans left us their concrete, slowly being rediscovered. The Indus Valley people left us their drains and their unreadable script, still waiting for the right mind to open it. They all left something. And perhaps the most profound thing they left was the question their absence forces us to ask. What are we building that will survive us, and who will be left to understand it when we are gone?